Let's get to this week's starts and sits, Fabs. At the quarterback position, who are we starting?
Jordan Love. If you have Jordan, you've been loving their production, averaging more than 20 fantasy points. I think it's going to be a high-scoring game against Houston at Lambeau Field. Their defense has allowed 3 quarterbacks to beat them for more than 19 points. And remember, Drake May had a pretty good game last week. I would start Jordan Love with confidence this week. And then Sam Darnold. Now, he's been mostly good this year, 19-plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. One of his last games was not great, but still, I like the matchup against Detroit. Now, they did hold Dak Prescott to 3.2 points. Aiden Hutchinson obviously is not going to be there. That's going to hurt the pass rush for Detroit. Sam Darnold is a very startable option this week and in my top 10.
All right, who are we sitting?
Patrick Mahomes. He's averaging, 14 points per game, which is not good in fantasy. The Niners defense, they've allowed just 2 quarterbacks to beat them for more than 12.8 points this year, and only one is thrown for more than 1 touchdown against them. So Patrick Mahomes is a risk for me, and so is Aaron Rodgers. I know he's got his BFF back in the Big Apple. Devontae Adams is expected to play against the Pittsburgh Steelers, but the Steelers defense hasn't allowed very many quarterbacks to have success. In fact, no quarterback has beaten them for more than 16.4 points in a game this season, and only 2 have thrown for multiple touchdown passes against them. So Aaron Rodgers is a risk. I would keep him on the bench.
At the running back position, who has a better than usual matchup? Who are we starting?
Tony Pollard looks like a very solid play, maybe even an RB1 type play. He's been really good. I mean, 15 plus points in 4 of his first 5 games. The Bills have allowed the second most fantasy points to running backs, and we remember that Derrick Henry smoked them, Devon Achane smoked them, so this is a very good spot. So is J.K. Dobbins, and he had 25 carries last week and 18.2 fantasy points. By the way, he was a stardom last week on this program. This week, he's got the Cardinals. Their defense has allowed 5 running backs to beat them for 15 plus points, including 3 who've gone over 20. So J.K. Dobbins is a RB2 and a very good RB2 this week.
Who is lower than an RB2? Who is somebody that we maybe want to think about putting on our bench?
Both of these players are probably going to be active in a lot of leagues, Lindsay, and I get it. Josh Jacobs' numbers aren't terrible, but he's kind of mid, right? I mean, he's averaging fewer than 12 points per game. He's 3rd from last among running backs in rush expected points added. The Texans are giving up 3.8 yards per rush and the 5th fewest points to running backs, so Josh Jacobs might not put up a great stat line, and the same goes for James Conner, who I told you to beware last week, and the numbers were not great. Keep that in mind. His numbers have also dropped in 3 straight games, and the Lightning Bolts have allowed 1 rushing touchdown to a running back. They've also allowed the 6th fewest fantasy points to running backs, and even though James Conner maybe will get a little bit of an uptick in terms of his usage because Marvin Harrison Jr. is probably not going to play, maybe they want to run the ball a little bit more. I don't love the matchup this week. I think James Conner's a risk-reward RB2 at best.
What about wide receivers?
Deontay Johnson, who has been real good since that one game against the Bears since Andy Dalton took over. When you look at the numbers, 19 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. He's seen 43 targets in that time. You got to start him this week against the Commanders. They've allowed the 5th most fantasy points to wide receivers and the 6th most points to the perimeter. Also, Zay Flowers, I think this is the 3rd straight week I've said to start him. And the last 2 weeks, he's been nails. And now he's got the Buccaneers on Monday night. And you look at the numbers, they've allowed 6 touchdowns and the 7th most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. And this should be a high-scoring game. Start Zay Flowers.
Wide receiver sits.
Let's start off with Brandon Ayuk. Yeah, he got paid a lot of money this summer. He hadn't done anything. He's been held to single-digit points in all but 1 game. He's near the bottom of the league among receivers in catch rate. And the Chiefs are coming off a bye, and they've given up the 4th fewest fantasy points to perimeter receivers. Now, Deebo Samuel is a little bit banged up. So if Deebo doesn't go, that changes things a little bit, but still the matchup is not great for Brandon Ayuk. And then George Pickens. I don't know what's going on there. Certainly seems like there's some sour grapes going on. He has not been good lately. He has scored fewer than 11 points in 4 of his last 5 games. He's averaging 8.3 points per game. He didn't have a good game last week against the Raiders, by the way. I told you to sit him. And now he's going to get sauced by Gardner in the Jets. So keep him on the sidelines. Also,
tight ends. Who are we starting?
Kyle Pitts. Hey, he's had 2 good games in a row. Double digits in 2 straight weeks. Against Seattle, this could be a high-scoring game as well. Seattle's defense has allowed 9 plus fantasy points to 4 tight ends, including George Kittle and Hunter Henry, who both beat them for more than 18 points. So Kyle Pitts should be in your lineup. And I'm going to go with Cade Otton. Again, high-scoring game. Lindsay said she likes this game going on Monday night. He's had 27 targets over his last 4 games, and the Ravens have allowed 72.7 receiving yards and the 5th most points per game to tight ends this year. So if you're hurting at tight end, maybe you have Jake Ferguson on a bye this week, or maybe you've been playing Cole Kmet, who's obviously not going to play also on a bye. Cade Otton is a nice streamer.
Who do we not like at tight end?
Temporary expectations for these two, because I think they're going to be in a lot of starting lineups. With tight end, it's such a bad position. I don't want to come out here and tell you, sit Chigakonkwo. You know what I mean? Like, doesn't help anybody. So I want to give you guys something to think about, and maybe this helps you in DFS. But Dalton Kincaid coming off of last week's game, it was, 11 points and not bad. He lost a touchdown to Dawson Knox in that contest. The Titans defense, now they haven't faced like any elite tight ends, but they've held Tucker Kraft, who I'm going to talk about in a second, and Cole Kmet to fewer than 5 points. And just one tight end has beat them for more than 10.9 points this season. And Amari Cooper is now a Buffalo Bill, which maybe spreads the targets a little bit thinner at the tight end position and all of the wide receivers in that group. So I'd beware Dalton Kincaid and I'd beware Tucker Kraft. And I had gone on a 2-week stretch where I said, start him. And then he had 2 good games. And then I said, well, I'm going to ride the Kraft bandwagon while it's hot.
Yeah.
And it did not work out last week. He had a bad game. And this week he's got the Texans. They've allowed one tight end to beat them for more than 7.2 points. And that includes Kincaid and Cole Kmet. And oh, by the way, only 2 teams have allowed fewer fantasy points per game to tight end than Houston. So keep that in mind. Tight ends, Lindsay, are averaging 21.5 yards per game as a unit against Houston this season. So it's not a good matchup for Tucker Kraft.